Welcome to 60 Minutes Nigeria. We're live in Benin City. I'm Uyi Agmofwegbe. It's always a delight to know that you're table for which we want to find perspectives and, of course, context this afternoon. The first is the 2022 budget proposal, which, of course, has been presented by the president. We understand as we speak right now, the leadership of the National Assembly is taking a look at that piece of document, and of course, hopefully, it will be passed, and the president will accent the proposal. But then again, questions, several of them have been asked about our budgetary process in Nigeria, all of the core variables associated with this process. Things like, for instance, funding of the budget, deficits, element of borrowing. And then you are asking, for example, is it not only common sense that we find out what has happened to the previous budget before we start talking about the next budget cycle going forward? Overall, the concerns have always been around the fact that our budgetary process is fundamentally faulty. And then you're asking yourself, how do we run circles around those problems as a country? It took several years before we could achieve the December to December cycle, or January to December cycle of budgeting in this country. Again, many experts I talk to still say, look, that has not gone full circle as it stands today. But perhaps it's a bit of a milestone from where we have been. However, the most recent concern regarding our budget has been the borrowing spree. For instance, we understand that the Senate has now invited several of the ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government, that is the MDAs, to come talk about how that several trillions have been borrowed in the last couple of years and how these monies have been spent. In fact, they are even alleging sabotage at some point. We'll get into all that in the course of the program today. Can we take a second to talk about cryptocurrencies as well? When the conversation around cryptos started, many persons waved it off with the left hand. But as it stands today, we know better. We understand that it has come to find foothold as, if you like, a financial phenomenon. But then we are asking, to what extent does it change the narrative regarding currency operations across the world? Right now, the Central Bank of Nigeria is talking about the e-Naira. Commercial banks across this country have been directed by the Apex Bank to integrate the e-Naira feature, particularly into their e-channels, with a specific reference to their online apps. For example, what exactly does this mean? What is the CBN out to achieve with the e-Naira? My brilliant guest on the program today will help us make sense of this conversation. Let's meet them quickly. First of all, I'm joined right here in the studio by Dr. Osaze Iyoa. He's an economist. Thank you for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Good afternoon, viewers.
Great. I'm also joined all the way from the United Arab Emirates by Dr. Ken Madugu. He's an assistant professor of accounting and finance. Thank you, Ken, for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, viewers.
Great. Hopefully we'll be joined in the middle of the program by Destiny Owobu, who is an economist and a statistician. So can I also begin with you quickly? I mean, since 2016, we spent a chunk of our time talking about the budgetary cycle in this country. Time will fail me to go into all of the rigors that you have also expressed regarding this process. As it stands today, this is 2021 coming to a close. I mean, the fiscal year in particular, we are getting into 2022. Many persons have raised concerns again as to how that, by their own estimation, by their own assessment, significance by way of appropriation has not been accorded very critical areas like education, health, for example, infrastructure. I mean, all of that's components that has to do with capital expenditure. Has your position on our budgetary cycle changed?
Thank you very much, Lee. I'm quite very happy that you make the reference to where we are coming from. And in 2016, you remember that I made very strong positions on this, and status quo has remained. Now, sometimes when we talk, it's as though we just sound like a broken record. No, we talk with all due respect from the standpoint of available evidence and knowledge. Now, from your introductory remarks, you summarized the very sorry situation that we find ourselves in the country. The question is, what has changed? Nothing has changed. The same template was exhumed and figures were superimposed. And I ask you, do we really have a budget? Well, for want of, a better word, let's say, yeah, we have a budget, but is it being implemented? Now, I expect that when you present a budget or prior to presenting a budget, there is need for accountability and transparency. To that extent, I mean, you should tell us the previous year's budget, to what extent has it been implemented? And when I mean implementation, I stand to be corrected. I'm not talking about reeling out figures. Because I believe in economics. Of course, I have taken a postgraduate study in economics myself. The expert I had using accounting. And the reason was primarily to understand how Nigerian economic works and generally the developing economies around the globe. I have discovered that in Nigeria, economics works on its head. Sometimes somebody tells you that GDP is growing, and that unemployment rate is decreasing, and we are having trader money, farmers' money, and fishers' money. Then the question is, if all of this has not in any way translate into the quality of life for an average Nigerian, there's a knowledge. So back to the issue, we have not gotten it right, because for us, I think the budget that we have now is a mere, like I said earlier, superimposition of figures in the template exhumed by the budget office, and of course the various ministries, departments, and agencies simply throw in their figures and take it to the National Assembly for a debate. And wherein these guys are supposed to look at it critically and call the ministers and directors and the other agents of government to account properly. What you see is a tea party, jamboree. And let me make it very clear. A budget, once it is passed, becomes an act. Sometimes we treat a budget as though it's just one piece of legislation or a piece of document. A budget is a piece of legislation. What that means is that if the president or any of the ministers breaches a section of the constitution, of the budget, which is a legal document, an act of the National Assembly, such a person should be made to face the wrath of the law. And if the president so does, the president should be impeached. Take note. Budget abuse is an impeachable offense. So sometimes we brush these very germane issues into the back door, and we begin to look at what I may term as frivolities. So I will stop there until we begin to delve into the import of what the budget has to offer.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Let me talk to EOR here. What should be by way of global best practice, what should be the best key performance indicators, if you like, KPIs as you call it, all right, to measure the success or otherwise of a budget? For example, we had a budget in 2020. It will appear we never even had a conversation as to how well or otherwise did we do with that budget, and now we're talking about 2022 budget. Are we actually being counterintuitive with the moves that we make with our budgets?
Yeah, to be very honest, budget performance in Nigeria has never been something that we as a people, especially government, has given recognition to. Just like the first commentator talked about. The budget seems to just be like a ceremonial event, presentation of budget. But looking at the key factors, as you talked about performance. How do we rate performance? We ask ourselves, what was inflation in 2020 before now? Inflation rose. What was our debt profile? Debt profile rose. Unemployment figures rose. What's our debt service to revenue ratio? It all rose. So how do we measure performance? How do we also measure capital expenditure? What was budgeted for capital expenditure? The minister, while giving her press briefing on Friday, said, as at today, just 1.1 trillion for capital expenditure has been released. So how much was budgeted in 2020 budget? It was between 3 to 4 trillion naira. So that alone tells you budget performance Okay, it was, then she also talked about in July, revenue was expected revenue for July, she gave it as an example, was 3.95 trillion. But our receivables actual was 2.62 trillion. So that was 34% short. And she just used it as an example that there has been a fall in revenue. Revenue potentials are not met. Revenue expectations are not met. So that alone gives us an indication of what our performance has been. So we would expect that when you are presenting a new budget, I don't know how Nigeria runs her budget, because when you look at other countries, I watch the American Parliament when they are present, it's like a State of the Nation debate. The president submits the budget, and there's a Q&A section. You ask questions, because for example, the budget was arranged, or it was submitted or presented on a benchmark of $57 per
barrel. Yes.
Inflation was put at 13%, expected inflation. GDP was put at 4.2. Crude oil production was put at expected 1.88 million barrels per day. You know, so we would expect that you ask questions that how these figures come about. Why not $50 per barrel? Why 57? Why not $60 per barrel?
By the way, the Senate is already faulting the $57 benchmark as it stands right now. I wouldn't know what the implications will be going forward. But I want to talk to you quickly before I get back to Dr. Madugu. I want to talk to you about a very vital component, which is oil. I mean, oil is the lubricant for our, if you like, the mechanism of our budget in this country. Some persons have said, until we look away altogether from oil, we can't get out of the woods. I sit here, for example, I have no idea whatsoever how possible that will be. Maybe you want to walk us through the dynamics.
And it's sadly so that we have continually depended on oil for our budget. In fact, the budget is basically principled or based on crude oil performance, crude oil price performance. That's why when during the COVID, crude oil prices fell, we had to readjust the budget, bring down many expenditures down. And it's sadly so. I hear people talk about diversification of the economy. I think it's wrong. The economy is diversified already.
As it stands right now.
It is. We have bitumen, we have uranium in the north. Bitumen, it's so abundant that you have farmers in Ondo State complain that they see minerals, black minerals coming out from the ground. We have a large market. I think that's what makes China's economy stronger than because of the population. Our market, they are investors, when you listen to them talk, they are itching to come into Nigeria. But because we seem to have remained like a joke, so they are going to other countries. And the world is not going to wait for us. Toyota recently announced they've set up an assembly plant in Ghana. Twitter in our presence went to Ghana. Some other countries, Michelin, Dunlop have relocated to Ghana. So it shows that we have a huge market. But even those countries who have gone there, ask them, the market is still in Nigeria. So it shows that we have a potential in the manufacturing sector. Imagine we are producing, I know in a sister program, I talked about manufacturing. I've sung about manufacturing. I asked, there's a name for developed economies. What's the other name for developed? Industrialized economy. You can't develop without industrialization. So the economy is diversified. We have a market for manufacturing. We have bitumen. We have all sorts of resources. What we should be diversifying is diversification of our export proceeds. Yeah, it's because we have not worked on all these other resources, alternative resources. That's why we're still relying on oil as our source of budgeting, our source of foreign forex, our source of revenue. So it's sadly so. Manufacturing can only be the way to go. We have to work on, and what's the reason why we are having that deficit in manufacturing is because of our infrastructural deficit. Our infrastructural deficit is terribly, terribly, terribly low. World Bank has said in the next 20 years, we would have to invest as much as 3 trillion naira conscientiously and honestly in our infrastructural sector. Look at power. The budget, 400 billion. Was budgeted to power. Power that we are.
Was that a abysmal?
It's in fact, if there's a word more explaining than abysmal, then that's the right word. Because 400 billion for the sector that, in fact, that's the reason why. Ask any manufacturer. That's why they are leaving, because of power. So I would have expected. Okay, security took about 15% of the budget. 2.41 trillion. Education was 1.29 trillion. That's just 8.9%. As against the UNESCO minimum
26%.
of 26%. Health was just 820 billion. You know, so security, what's security? 15%. Yeah, we know we have a security challenge. But you know, these expenditures are not expenditures that you can track. How do you track that so equipment or weapons have been bought? You know, so I think there's a lot of misprioritization in the budget. And I think it's something that is worrying.
I'm going to allow you to catch your breath now while I turn to Dr. Madugu again. I mean, he talked about industrialization just a while ago. Professor Madugu, Dr. Madugu, people have talked about issues around China. They say, look, if Nigeria means business, there's so much we can learn from China. They say, can we not shut our borders, for example, just like China had done a few decades ago, to say, we want to look inwards, we want to grow our capacity on the front of industrialization, we want to look at local production, quite frankly, and tell ourselves the truth. So that in 20, 30 years' time, when Nigeria opens its doors again to the world, it's a different Nigeria altogether from what it has been. Does that look possible? Because some people say we politic so much that we forget that there's something called the economy, and as such, we're only just joking with ourselves. We can't get past this point. But the point I'm driving at actually is the borrowing, the level of borrowing we have seen recently. Borrowing has become almost like a kind of thank God it's Friday out thing. Is it about the reality we're dealing with, or have we lost track of what we should be doing as a country?
All right, great. You've asked two very fundamental questions, and I'll take it in the order in which they were asked. Can Nigeria become the China of Africa? The answer is yes. Is Nigeria willing to become the China of Africa? The answer is no. And I try to be very simple as much as I can. Now, in 2006, precisely, they founded this lecture at the University of Benin. Professor Chukwuma Soludo, then Central Bank Governor, delivered a lecture with the title, Can Nigeria Become the China of Africa? Where he chronicled how that could work. And he painted a very clear picture. And if that singular document was implemented, Nigeria would have by now, be rubbing shoulders with the likes of China and even the United States of America. Why? Because we have the market, we have the population. The greatest asset that God has blessed Nigeria with is the human resource. So we have the population, and of course we have a youth population that has that zest, that energy to turn the fortunes of this country around. But the question is, are there policies that are enabling this, industrialization prospect to come to fruition? The answer is no. Why? Because I give you a typical example. You can imagine a country that is currently producing next to nothing. All right? Like my, colleague said, putting power on the bottom of the ladder. I mean, it doesn't just work that way. Now, one would expect that if you asked me today, what should be the priority for Nigeria? I think it should be fixing the power sector. Yeah, we know we have other challenges, but truth be told, that is why you see that all these pronouncements about, diversifying into non-oil sector is not working. Why? Because there is no, power to give life to all these pronouncements. And the government does not have the political will to transform that. So to that extent, in as much as we have the ability to become the channel of Africa, we do not have the infrastructure, we do not have the political way to do that. Now, coming into the issue of borrowing, it's easy to say, oh, our debt to GDP ratio is very low. Officers of the administration of this government, they are quick to say we are not borrowing too much because we are within the threshold. Yes, ideally, I agree. We are debt to GDP ratio about 35%. In Ghana, it's about 60-something%. In India, it's about 80%. And now let's come to the other side of it. What is the tax to GDP ratio in this country? In Nigeria, tax to GDP ratio is around 6%, abysmally low. But when you go to these countries that Nigeria tries to, compare, with, you discover that their tax to GDP ratio is around, 80%, 90%, 70%, as the case may be. So what that tells you is that they have the capacity to generate revenue to fund their borrowing. But ours is the direct opposite. So now let's come to it. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with borrowing, like so many people have said. But what are we borrowing for? The monies we have borrowed, to what extent have we accounted for them? What problem have they solved? And you are quick to be told, oh, yeah, we are building the rail, we are doing this, we are doing that. To what extent has that improved the quality of life of an average Nigerian? How is that driving industrialization? And that is why I think it was in 2005, 2015, when I was at your studio, and I said that the central bank government, central bank hedgeman, as in there was, that with the way we have it, or we had it then, that Nigeria was not going anywhere, that Nigeria, the central bank would be badly politicized. And that is what we are finding today. The Central Bank of Nigeria, for example, has become an appendage of the presidency, an organ that is supposed to be independent. And that is why you see a central bank fighting with a foreign currency. It's not going to work. You know what the Nigerian Central Bank is doing? They want to eat their cake and have it by having to regulate how dollar, naira exchange rate is, administered using the monetary policy tools, and also want to have their economics developed. No, dollar will have to find its level, and that can only happen in a competitive environment, meaning that you have to allow it to float. Now, that will naturally devalue the currency, and that will encourage investors to come in, again, if the enabling infrastructure are in place. So when the currency of a country is weak, definitely it does not connote that such a country is weak. Not in all cases. Like when it was, the naira is weak and the dollar is strong. What determines the strength of a country's currency is its productive capacity. All right? So because we are not producing anything, we are not exporting anything, then we are negotiating from the standpoint of weakness. And when the central bank comes, we want to, touching the loose ends, trying to say, well, we have to peg the exchange rate at a certain rate, it's not going to work. And that is why you find it today that the central bank says it's 410. But you and I know that it is more than that. It's within the neighborhood of 550. Why? Because it is finding its true value. And its true value can be found by the forces of demand and supply. So the long and short is that we're not going to say anything different here, to be honest with you. We're not going to say what Nigerians have said. But the fact is that we have a government, both federal and state levels, that are not willing to do their bit to deliver on the mandate upon which they have promised several things to do for Nigerians. So to that extent, the truth is that continuing to borrow, and look at it, when we devalue, this is the funny thing. When we devalue our currency and we borrow, what that means is that we need more naira to exchange for more dollars and to pay for these loans over a long period of time. Now, where will this money come from? Where we have dwindling oil revenue, the price of oil is highly volatile, and of course, with the advent of renewable energy and sustainability, in the near future, many countries will never need this oil. Now, instead of a country that is supposedly on the road to industrialization, prioritizing power and science and technology, you can imagine that science and technology take about 0.7% of this budget. Power is taking about 1.8%. Now, and you see presidency ranking higher than power. I mean, what is presidency? Look at National Assembly ranking higher than, key sectors of the economy. Now you ask yourself, what is Nigeria's goal? I have asked this question several times. What is our national goal? Clearly, we have none, because if we have one, we'll be able to structure our budget with the intention of achieving that particular goal. So until we have been able to properly articulate what our goal is and channel our energy invigorate the economy, block all the loopholes, ensure that corruption is, sent back in, if that will ever happen anyway, we will not get the Nigeria of our dream. It's my candid opinion.
All right, great. I'm going to revert to you in a minute, but let's talk to Ioha here. Dr. Madugu just made mention of countries, from the standpoint of tax to GDP ratio, for example. People have always made reference to countries like the Netherlands, which is not as big as some states in Nigeria, for example, that relies largely on taxation to run the economy, even though they have oil in the ground. How are we doing with our tax? Most times, our tax system, most times you hear the FIRS, this is the Federal Inland Revenue Service, for example, talking about projection for, say, the fiscal year 2022, how much they are looking at in terms of projected revenue. You hear customs, for example. But let's talk about tax in particular. What is your assessment, candidly, of our tax drive and policy in Nigeria?
Yeah, our tax drive is very low. And I think we have come to this point just because we have seen oil as a free resource all this while, easy money. So in the years past, oil had always sold at $100. In fact, between 2000 and 2014, oil averaged $100 per barrel. Per barrel. So we have almost come to this relaxation that money will always come. So we have toned down on our tax drive. Was it last year, the Vice President talked about the fact that just only over 40 people or so pay over 1 million naira as tax in the country. The minister, when she was giving her press briefing on Friday, said the tax base in the country is just 41 million. So we are talking of a country of 200 million people. The tax base just being 41 million. So it talks about how poorly our tax drive, our tax efficiency. It's not really the tax net, how wide it is. We have taxes. Yeah, a multiplicity of them, but how efficient it has been. And most times I don't like to bring corruption into our discussion because that's a major filter of whatever resource because we should be talking in the budget. 400 billion was allocated or was expected from MDAs to bring in revenue. 400 billion, a paltry 400 billion. 400 billion that FRS alone should handle. We are not talking of customs, Nigerian Ports Authority, immigration, 400 billion. The Senate President talked about the fact that we should be expecting over $1 trillion from just the MDAs. So we watched it on television when NDDC probe, when we had them and the back and forth, put off your mic and so on. There were revelations. The Minister of NDDC sent the names, and he said that he attached the names of those that were involved, but they didn't read it out. What has happened to that? Then now we are budgeting another set of funds and going to give all these MDAs. So sometimes you look at Nigeria, it almost seems like we're a joke. It's a country that is just made of clowns because you have, I don't get that. There were revelations. The Accountant General just talked like about last month ago that I'm going to allow you to step on your brakes quickly. We're taking a break, all right? We'll come back. I'll allow you to continue with your thoughts. I will back shortly. Everyone, stay with us. So I'm just going to allow you to continue with the point you were making a while ago. Yeah, so I talked about the fact that the Accountant General mentioned last month that about 1 trillion was missing in terms of revenue from most of these MDAs, especially the tax collection ones that are related to tax collection, customs and FRS. Yes. And up to now, there is no investigation on that. And we are budgeting another set of millions for those same MDAs. I'm tempted to talk about this debt profile that you asked because it's a burning issue right now. You talk about what is the composition. I've heard government functionaries say debt to GDP ratio is sustainable, 21.6%, fine. But the question is, what proportion of our GDP is driven by production? What proportion of our GDP is productive? GDP has different components: consumption plus investment plus government plus exports minus imports. So what proportion of production, which is investment, is driving our GDP? The largest component of our GDP is consumption. Right. So we can't even be priding ourselves with the fact that debt ratio to GDP is low. So if we have a GDP that is driven by productivity, where investment, which is C plus I plus G, investment component, is the highest component, probably 60–70%, then we'll feel relaxed. And in any case, what are you paying paying the debt is not really the problem. The debt servicing.
Yeah.
Debt servicing in the budget was placed at 3.8 trillion. Then the budget is to run on a deficit of 6.26 trillion. That's the expected loan. But I know that definitely, I'll be called back. Definitely, the loan would increase. Our loan borrowing with that in next year will increase to about 10 trillion. Because we budgeted about 5 trillion.
Why is that? Because economic circumstances would have changed?
Yeah, because what's the budget based on? Primarily on oil.
Okay, which is volatile.
Volatile in terms of prices, and we are not in control of production.
Right.
Oil price just increased to about $83 recently. Why? Because OPEC has intervened in production quota. They've tried to put ceilings on production.
Like
so that's why we have capped. Yeah, so that's why we had prices increase. But how sustainable that would be for the entire year is not assured. Saudi Arabia and some other countries who can produce as much as 5 million barrels a day and so on, you are limiting them. So most times we always have this situation where they break the rules. So how sustainable that is, I don't know. Then we also put the budget on the fact that MDAs and so on are to bring. Most times, as I said, with our revenue targets, they are never met. July, I told you about 3.9 trillion, just 2 points. So we know that in the 2020 budget, we budgeted for about 5. The loan accounted for just about 5 trillion, but we ended up borrowing as much as 8 trillion. We just sent this Euro bond 4 billion recently. It wasn't budgeted. So we know that I'm just saying that our revenue, expected revenue, is placed at 10 trillion in this budget. Why 6 trillion from loans? I don't see us hitting 6 trillion in terms of revenue. And that's where the problem has always been, especially in the last 5 years. So what happens when your revenue projections fall to 6 trillion from 10 trillion, expected that deficit has to be covered by more borrowings. So we might end up having to borrow as much as 10 trillion. Then what's now your debt servicing to revenue? So that will also increase. Debt servicing, we talk about debt to GDP ratio. Our debt servicing to GDP ratio, not debt to GDP now, debt servicing to GDP ratio is 73%. Our debt servicing to revenue ratio is close to 70. During the pandemic, it was as high as 98% when oil fell. But with the increase in oil prices, it's about 80% now. So it means if revenue projections are not met and debt increases, so debt servicing could grow as much as 100%. And let's even say 90, in the 90 region percent. So if that is taking as much, then we have just 10% to spend. And therefore, we are putting ourselves under risk. If this continues for the next 3, 4, 5 budget cycles, then we would have problems with even servicing our debt. And that brings us to an economic crisis. By the time you can't service your debt, that's what has happened to economies like Zimbabwe and so on. So how do we show up our revenue? I think that's the major problem. The president adduced to it, I'm sorry, when he said we don't have a sustainability issue, that rather we have a revenue challenge.
Was that correct?
And it's difficult to understand. Why? Because it's just like saying, I'm not mad, but I have mental issues. So what's debt service? What's the debt? What's the revenue? It's because you have revenue issues. That's why you're borrowing. So we are just saying same thing in a different way. So revenue. It means when you have issues of debt like this, it is 2 ways. You either find ways to boost your revenue or reduce costs. But in the last 3 years, our budget has been expanding. It was 13 trillion last year. It's 16 trillion now. So we are expanding the budget instead of reducing it. There's no law that says your budget must always increase. No. So what's happening with revenue? Short ways, solutions, short-term ways of finding revenue. Our ports are in a terrible state. You have people complain of sending trucks. Their trucks have been in the port for like 2 months. They've not been called into the port from the holding bay. You have most importers say they bring containers from abroad, and 2 months
clearance is rigorous.
So sometimes when they are even called to clear, they look at the demurrage that they have to pay for 2 months compared to what is in their containers.
So they let it off.
Sometimes they just allow it go. So you now have truckers even sending their trucks to Ghana. So that they can get in 1 or 2 days, it's exported, and we are losing foreign exchange.
And that means loss for Nigeria.
Exactly. All right, so our cost, sorry. Looking at the budget, I was looking at the estimates for the Aso Villa. You know, you have 427 billion was budgeted for the presidents and foodstuffs and catering materials. 427. 301 for the presidents and 156 for the vice president. So 427, that's more than the budget for power at 400 billion. So sometimes see how serious are we. We are talking, there was a budget also for 21 billion for the presidential wing of the State Medical Center. This is the State Medical Center that we are traveling abroad for medical care that is not being used. 5.2 billion was budgeted for renovation of the complex, Aso Villa. 4.8 was estimated in this year's budget, and we are budgeting 5.2 billion again. Just so I'm wondering what has gone wrong. Telecommunications was budgeted at 400 million. Spare parts for this budget. Our tires for most of the vehicles was budgeted at 800 million. You know, so when you look at these figures and you look at what is budgeted for power, what's budgeted for education, it's just mind-boggling.
So you're saying that priorities are misplaced?
Terribly misplaced.
I think this conversation is apparently long drawn out, but I want to turn back again to Dr. Modugu so we can discuss our second topic on the program. The issue of cryptocurrency has been here for a while, but in the last 2 years thereabouts, the conversation has never been louder. In fact, as it stands today, it has assumed an institutional dimension, to the point that even the CBN, that is the Central Bank of Nigeria, is beginning to talk about the so-called e-naira. In fact, we understand there's a policy framework that is in the works along that direction. And then you're wondering, what exactly does it mean for the everyday Nigerian?
Thank you very much. That is one area that has generated some mixed reactions in recent times. And the CBN was supposed to have commenced the introduction of that currency as at October 1, I think, and they called it off midway. Now, digital currency actually has come to stay, you know, cryptocurrencies, if we like. We have several of them, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a host of others. Now, what it does actually, the brain behind cryptocurrency is that it is a currency that eliminates the rent-seeking tendencies of the middlemen. In other words, the known financial institutions, because there are no intermediaries. Now, it comes with its risks and, of course, opportunities. Now, where the Central Bank of Nigeria got it wrong was when they accurately banned the cryptocurrency operations in Nigeria, I mean, surreptitiously, and turn around to want to introduce a digital currency. Now, the question any sane thinking Nigerian should take is, or should ask is, what is the digital currency or the digital naira, and what is the fiat naira? In my opinion, they are the same thing. And I tell you what, the digital currency like Ethereum, the cryptocurrency like Ethereum, Bitcoin, operates a wallet for the owner, I mean, trying to make it simple, in such a manner that the value is not tied to any currency. But what the CBN told us is that the digital currency and the fiat, I mean, the digital naira or the e-naira, as they call it, and the fiat money will be the same. In other words, it will take the value of the naira. Then the question I ask you, Uyi, is that if I transfer some money now using my app, any of the banking apps, use it to transfer my naira to your own account, what do you call that? That is already digital currency in some form. And that is why the central bank has problem explaining this to Nigerians. Because the digital currency, you know, is going to operate on a wallet that will be controlled by the central bank. I mean, which is the digital naira, the e-naira. Now, once there is a regulatory authority, then that takes away the very essence of cryptocurrency, wherein you can not determine the value of that currency except by the parties that are exchanging the values. So, the only thing I see there for the digital naira is that it will help facilitate transactions, especially for medium and large scale investors. But as to whether there are specific gains that you and I, ordinary Nigerians will benefit, of course, it's a no for me. So when CBN came to ban the cryptocurrency, my argument then was that don't ban, regulate and tax. But CBN said, oh no, it's fraught with a lot of challenges, and money launderers use cryptocurrency to launder money and all that. And I asked, don't we have people who launder money with the current naira and dollars, with the fiat money? So I think cryptocurrency is something that has come to stay. A lot of Nigerians have bought into it, and it's, of course, like I said, it has its own challenges. I think, yes, it's highly susceptible to financial fraud, like every other currency. Yeah, but the problem is that it cannot be tracked. And that is where the central bank comes in to ensure that there is a form of regulation, not the determination of its value, but the operations. Because these things work through blockchain. The technology that they all operate on is blockchain. Now, what the central bank would have done is to also set up its blockchain architecture to ensure that these transactions can be monitored. Now, if, for instance, there's a transfer of value, you can, of course, tax those value, and at the end of the day, that leads to generating more revenue for, the government. But for whatever reasons, they banned the cryptocurrency, and they came to introduce an in-era that is inexplicable, in my opinion, and stand to be corrected, because there is no difference between the in-era to be introduced by the central bank and the fiat money. Why? Because simply, what the central bank has told us is that it enables you to transfer money to any location. And I ask, can't I transfer naira to anyone with my phone? Of course I can do that. So I think, now one other thing is that the commercial banks were celebrating. They didn't know until they have, because when it was to be introduced, they were celebrating this thing. What I would have done, and I try to be corrected, watch, central bank may have to wait for a long time if they will ever introduce that. Why? Once you introduce that digital naira, you have completely obliterated the commercial banks. Why? They will no longer be able to charge you these bank charges for your transfer and all that. It will eliminate that, because it's going to be working on a different, architecture. And this will not ordinarily, it ought not to be regulated by the banks. But what the central bank wants to do is to make sure that you have a naira account. So you have to have a naira bank account in Nigeria, then have that digital naira kept in that wallet with the bank. Then the question is, what makes it a digital currency if you have to tie that digital currency to your bank account in Nigeria? So these are the complexities, and these are the issues that the central bank has not been able to resolve, and probably that was why they had to suspend it for that notice.
Okay, let me ask you a follow-up question. In line with your own thoughts about these, the vice president, as at the time the CBN had banned cryptocurrency, said, look, rather than ban altogether, why don't you put up a regulatory framework of sorts, and so on and so forth. Now you have countries across the world now saying, by so and so time we'll start accepting crypto. You have companies now saying you can buy our products, you can access our services using crypto, and so on and so forth. On account of that, economists on a global scale are now saying, look, going forward, this is a new world order. Do you share that sentiment?
No, of course I do. 20 years ago, of course, Google was, something that you wouldn't have imagined. Just 7 years ago, it couldn't have been possible that I, being in the United Arab Emirates, be discussing with you over there in Nigeria. But today it has become a reality. Now, in fairness to the vice president, he's been very forthright, and I have to commend him for that. Remember that, when this issue came up, he said, yes, of course, the central bank shouldn't ban the cryptocurrency. And just recently, which the president has tacitly corroborated, and he said dollars should find its level, like we say in the street. So the fact is that they know, the vice president knows exactly what the problem of Nigeria is. The cryptocurrency has come to stay. Now, if I tell you the people I know, Nigerians, who have made legitimate money from cryptocurrency, yours sincerely has a cryptocurrency account. I don't trade in them. I'm not advising anybody to go into it. I decided to open an account, at least to see for myself, not just talking from a distance.
Yes.
And I have purchased a lot of things with my cryptocurrency. All around the world. In fact, buy, different assets with my, account. So with different currencies in them. I don't trade. I just have them, just have them there, to appreciate in value, just a speculator. Now, as it may, the question is it being accepted by major dealers? Of course, yes. In fact, as simple as to recharge my phone, I use my crypto account to do that at the moment. I mean, I'm telling you from experience, not what I read in the papers. So it has come to stay. Many universities now abroad accept digital currency, cryptocurrency for the payment of school fees. So why can't the regulatory authorities allow these things to blossom? I mean, Nigeria cannot exist in isolation. Yeah, there are some countries like China that we appropriate and reprobate. Yes, the issue is that it's still being studied, and what I expect the central bank to do, like I said earlier, is to have, some research team do a critical analysis of the operations of cryptocurrency, how it can be abused, like every other currency and like every other system. If there are some forms of regulations, definitely there will be an abuse. So to be scared of the abuses and, on the basis of that, completely, give it a wave of your left hand, I don't think it's in the best interest of Nigerians, especially now that we are all clamoring for foreign reserve. Who say you can have, your currency, your reserve in digital form, and trade with it, do business with it, and that will also increase financial inclusion. They all shout that Nigerians, should be included, financially, and you can't be pursuing financial inclusiveness, and at the end of the day, you are also blocking the channel through which Nigeria can be brought into that financial inclusiveness. So I think they need to get their priorities right, and that is why you see, for example, the fiscal and the monetary policies are running across purposes. This shouldn't be so. They should have a uniform goal, but the approaches should be different. The fiscal authorities, from the office of the Minister for Finance, should do her part, ensuring that inflation is kept at its lowest ebb through increase in production and creation of employment. And on the other hand, the central bank should use the monetary tools, the money supply, and exchange rate and interest rate, as the case may be, to help invigorate the economy. How do you explain? Do you know now they are shouting diaspora remittances? How will you expect, Nigerians in diaspora to repatriate funds, wherein putting the money in your Naira account automatically becomes paper, the following money? Now, you deposit your money in a commercial bank. They pay you interest next to zero. Somebody else comes in the name of being an investor and he needs that money. You give that money to the person at 28, 29% interest rate. I, the owner of the money, gets less than 1%. Then you get, 28, 29% from investors. You see, the Nigerian system is designed to perpetually impoverish Nigerians. It's not going to work. So the cost of capital in Nigeria is very high. And those who own that capital are not getting value. You see banks declaring very burgeoning profit on a yearly basis. The question is, where are they getting this profit from? They are rent-seeking institutions, and I think the central bank, if it is genuine about its monetary policies, should be able to ensure that the interest rate, especially to investors, in this case, the cost of capital to investors, is brought down, because the banks do not have a justification to charge such abysmally high interest rate. In view of the fact that if you look at the Monetary Policy Committee meeting every time, they have always kept the monetary policy rate at 11% or thereabouts. So why should any bank go as far as charging 28% on cost of borrowing, and you want to grow the economy, where in some other countries in Asia it's as low as 1%? I'm afraid this policy's misalignment wouldn't help us.
All right. So let's begin to tie it up now. I mean, in 2 minutes, Dr. Ayoa, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is now significantly concerned about the adoption and the proliferation of digital currencies across the globe. Do you have a problem with that standpoint?
No, I don't. I want to align with CBN on this issue very quickly. Crypto has its downfalls. Its good point is the fact that yes, it helps to edge against inflation, especially in this our country where inflation is about 18%. So you keep your money in bitcoins, it helps to, or in crypto, it helps to hedge against it. Then with the fact that we have problems with forex availability in Nigeria, so most SMEs who are not able to access the official forex window have been able to use it to carry out transactions. But the problem, which I know most countries, and to correct the point, I don't think CBN has banned cryptocurrency. You know, there are three categories. Some countries allow cryptocurrency. Some countries have banned it, like Saudi Arabia, but Nigeria really didn't ban it. It just stopped financial banks, the financial sector, the regulated sector, from supporting those transactions, from keeping accounts with them. So the Nigerian, I don't think there's any central bank that would allow a currency that does not have a central regulator. It's anonymous. You really cannot say this where crypto regulation is.
It operates off the radar.
Exactly. So you know, CBN, monetary policy to us, an economist, CBN wants to be in control of money supply and money demand. That's why you see they sell TB rates, OMO transactions, TB rates to regulate money circulation and inflation. So I know CBN, there's no CBN. Canada and most countries have either banned cryptocurrency or quasi-banned it, just like what they did with the financial sector, not to deal with them. So most of these transactions, CBN has accused that it's used for illegal transactions, money laundering, buying weapons, cyber terrorism, and so on. That's because there's no regulation. You can't track these transactions. And I don't think any central bank would sit down and allow that. So I think I align with the IMF report that I know it's a risk. When you don't have regulation on these, there's no central regulation. So what happens when something goes wrong? So the regulation is the issue, and the fact that the CBN currency, you know, it would go with bank transactions, just like what he said. Yeah. So I think I align with CBN on this. On the
you align with CBN and you share the sentiments of the IMF as well on this.
Yeah, I do.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid this is the much time we allow us to take on the program. Thank you so much, Dr. Osaze Yoha, for coming on the program. I appreciate your expertise. We also want to say a very, very big thank you to Dr. Kemodigo, who has joined us live all the way from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates via Zoom. Thank you so much. We appreciate you as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, this is where we're leaving the program. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm Uyag Mofwegbe. Our coverage on ITV continues. Enjoy the rest of your day.